Okay, so what we're going to do now is do a jeans pocket. So this is the sort of regular jeans cutaway pocket here. We have a pocket bag which will sit inside here, and that's joined, so that's all one piece. And then we have our facing here, and the facing will get sewn on here so that when that folds back, so we have our, and so this edge here will be bagged out with the lining. So the first thing I need to do is just secure the facing onto our pocket piece. So just hold it flat and make sure that you've got it flat so that you don't end up with this all sort of pushing and end up with a bubble of fabric here. So keep it nice and flat. And with this overlocked edge too, you know, you've got this is the edge of the overlocking, then you've got the second line there, and do it along that line or in between those two there so that you don't have, you know, like a lot of the facing flapping around past the stitch line. Okay, so that's the preparation for the pocket bag. Now we're going to, so this is going to go in here. So we need to start with this on the outside. So with the facing side facing down, and we're going to stitch this around with a 6mm seam. I use 6mm because it then means that you generally don't have to clip in for it to sit nicely around the curve when you bag it out. So lining up these edges. So stitched around there at 6mm. Now before I fold it back inside, I'm going to do an understitch. So what we're doing here, and I'll stitch it and then I'll show you, but I'm actually stitching through the pocket bag and through the seam allowances. Actually you can see it here. So I've got both the seam allowances facing the pocket bag, and I'm sewing through those 3 layers. Sometimes people stitch it in the ditch, which doesn't do anything. You actually need the row of understitching to be on the inside layers. Okay, so you can see that row there and how it's stitched through. You might not be able to see this, but it's stitched through the pocket layer and the seam allowances, and that means that when we fold this to the inside, that the pocket bag rolls under nicely, and you can't see it from the outside. So at this stage, if you want to put any top stitching on the pocket, do it now because you won't be able to get in to do it later. Sometimes with most pairs of jeans they would have a row of stitching here, so it'd be a double row. Another option is just to do a single row, what I call a welt stitch or a foot width, and so the folded line just lines up with the outer edge of the foot. So we're going to do that this time. Oops. And you could press it before you started doing this sewing, but generally just manipulating the fabric with your fingers is enough. And make sure that when you go around these curves you can't see any of that the lining rolling out, and that the lining is tucked under nicely. So there's my row of stitching there, and you can see where that sits on the inside. Okay, so now we're going to finish off the rest of the pocket here. What you can do so that you don't have to overlock this bottom edge is that you can bag it out back on itself. So what you do there, rather than it going that way and then stitching along there, you actually fold it back on itself. And so that we don't have a raw edge inside the pocket, we can sew this twice. So the first row we're going to do sort of like a French seam really. So the first row will be at just a foot width. Okay, and you can see it looks a bit weird at the moment, but what we're now going to do is bag this out. Let's lay that flat for you to see. So that's the seam that we've stitched along there. You can get a pin in to pull that corner out nicely if you want to. And so that's the way it's going to be finished. But because we've got you can see the raw edge in there, we're just going to give it another row of stitching. So make sure that you wiggle this around in your fingers. Again, you could press it, but I usually just work it with my fingers so I don't have to get up and go to the iron. So what you don't want is any like pleating along this edge. Sort of wiggle it with your fingers till you can see the actual original stitch line there. And this row of stitching is a tiny bit wider so that when you look inside you don't see the raw edge of the fabric. It's inside those two layers. So there's our pocket there. The one thing we have to do now is just it's going to sit these flat on the outside, and we're just going to stay stitch the pocket bags in place. So I'm lining up those edges there, and it'll sit pretty much where it wants to, so just go with that. And these two rows of stitching hold everything in place for when you sew the side seam and when you're sewing the waistband on as well. Okay, so there's our finished pocket.